I knew buying a snowplow truck would either be the smartest decision I ever made or the dumbest. And standing in my driveway at 6 in the morning during the worst ice storm Massachusetts had seen in 20 years, I was still trying to figure out which one it was. My name is Vincent Palmer, and I'm a 34-year-old civil engineer who moved to Brookshire Meadows, a planned community about 40 minutes outside Boston, 3 years ago. The house was perfect, the neighborhood seemed quiet, and I got a good deal. What I didn't count on was Patricia Thompson, the president of the Brookshire Meadows Homeowners Association, becoming the bane of my existence. The trouble started innocently enough. I'd always been into winter preparedness, probably because my dad ran a landscaping business and taught me early that winter was when you made your real money if you played your cards right. So when I moved into my house on Maple Ridge Drive, I bought a used Ford F-350 with a plow attachment and invested in proper winter supplies. I'm talking industrial salt, sand, snow shovels, ice melt, the works. I kept everything organized in heavy-duty storage bins in my 3-car garage, and I made sure I had enough to handle whatever New England winters threw at me. The first winter was fine. I plowed my driveway, helped a few neighbors, and nobody said a word. The second winter, I started a small side business plowing driveways for elderly residents in the community. Made some extra cash, kept people safe, everyone was happy. But last spring, that's when Patricia Thompson noticed what I was doing. She showed up at my door on a Saturday morning in May, clipboard in hand, wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my mortgage payment. Patricia was in her mid-50s, with blonde hair cut in that specific style that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," and she had this way of smiling that never quite reached her eyes. "Vincent, hello," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm Patricia Thompson, HOA president." "I don't think we've formally met." "We haven't," I said, standing in my doorway. "What can I do for you?" "Well, I've been reviewing our community records, and I noticed you've been running a business out of your home, specifically a snow removal service." I frowned. "I plow a few driveways in winter. It's not really a business." "You're accepting money for services, correct?" "Yeah, but it's just helping out neighbors." Patricia's smile tightened. "According to our HOA bylaws, Section 12, Paragraph 4, no resident may operate a commercial enterprise from their property without written approval from the board. You'll need to submit an application, pay the relevant fees, and attend a hearing." I stared at her. "You're joking." "I assure you, I'm not. The HOA exists to maintain property values and ensure our community standards. We can't have residents running unauthorized businesses. It's snow plowing, in winter, for old people who can't do it themselves. Rules are rules, Vincent. I'll expect your application by the end of the month." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and I noticed you have quite a lot of supplies stored in your garage. The board will need to review those as well. We have regulations about storing commercial quantities of materials in residential areas." That was the beginning. I submitted the application because I figured it was easier than fighting. The HOA rejected it, claiming my business activities would create excessive traffic and noise. Never mind that I worked maybe 10 hours total during each snowstorm. Never mind that every single neighbor I'd helped wrote letters supporting me. Patricia and her board voted no, and that was that. I stopped charging money, but I kept helping people. And I kept my supplies because they were for my personal use, and there wasn't a damn thing in the bylaws that said I couldn't have them. Then came this winter, and everything changed. The ice storm hit Brookshire Meadows on January 15th. The Weather Service had been warning about it for days, talking about how a perfect combination of temperature, humidity, and precipitation, was going to create dangerous conditions. I'd been watching the forecasts closely, and 2 days before it hit, I made a run to the hardware supply store and topped off all my materials. Sand, salt, ice melt, everything. The storm started on a Tuesday night. Rain fell steadily, and the temperature dropped to exactly 31 degrees, cold enough that everything froze on contact but warm enough that the precipitation kept coming as freezing rain instead of snow. By Wednesday morning, Brookshire Meadows looked like a skating rink. I was up at 5, suited up in my winter gear, and started working on my driveway. The ice was thick, nearly an inch in some places, and it took me 2 hours to clear my own property properly. I laid down sand on my driveway and walkways, salted the edges, and made sure everything was safe. Around 7:30, my neighbor, old Mr. Henderson, came shuffling over. He was 76, lived alone since his wife passed, and he looked terrified. "Vincent," he called from the edge of my driveway, not daring to step onto his own icy walkway. "I can't get out. Everything's ice. I need to get to my doctor appointment, but I'll kill myself trying to get to my car." "Give me 20 minutes, I told him. "I'll get you sorted." I grabbed my supplies and went to work on his property. It took me almost an hour because his driveway was steep and the ice was particularly bad. But I got it done, laid down sand and salt, and made sure he could get out safely. While I was working, 3 more neighbors came over asking for help. I told them all the same thing: give me some time and I'd get to them. I wasn't charging anyone. I was just being a decent human being. I was working on Mrs. Chen's driveway around 10, when Patricia Thompson's silver Mercedes SUV came sliding down Maple Ridge Drive. She was going maybe 5 miles an hour, her wheels spinning uselessly on the ice, and she nearly crashed into a mailbox before she managed to stop. Her window rolled down. "Vincent Palmer, I need to speak with you immediately." I was tired, cold, and not in the mood. "Kind of busy here, Patricia. This is an emergency HOA matter. Right now, please." I stabbed my shovel into the ice and walked over to her car. "What?" "The main roads through Brookshire Meadows are completely iced over. The township hasn't treated them yet, and we have a situation. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting and we need solutions. I need you to attend. Noon today, my house. I'm helping people who need it right now. This affects everyone in the community. Noon. Don't be late." She rolled up her window and carefully maneuvered her car around, sliding the whole way. I finished Mrs. Chen's driveway, then went home to warm up and grab some food. I wasn't particularly interested in Patricia's emergency meeting, but I was curious what she wanted. At noon, I drove carefully over to her house, which was in the Oakmont section of Brookshire Meadows, the fancy part where the lots were bigger and the houses cost twice as much. 6 cars were parked outside, and I recognized them all as belonging to board members. I walked in to find Patricia, along with board members Deborah Williams, Robert Fitzgerald, Margaret Anderson, and Stephen Clark, all sitting in her formal living room looking stressed. "Thank you for coming, Vincent," Patricia said, gesturing to an empty chair. "We have a serious problem. The township is completely overwhelmed. They've told us it will be at least 2 days before they can get to our community roads. In the meantime, no one can safely drive. We've already had 3 minor accidents this morning." "Okay," I said. "What do you want me to do about it?" Robert Fitzgerald leaned forward. He was a lawyer, mid-40s, always looked like he was about to argue a case. "You have snow removal equipment and supplies. We need you to treat the main community roads, at least the priority routes that people need to get in and out." I blinked. "You're asking me to plow and treat all the main roads. Do you have any idea how much material that would take, how much time?" "We're not asking," Patricia said. We're telling you. As a member of this community, you have a responsibility to help during emergencies, and you have the resources. Resources I bought with my own money for my own use. Resources that are excessive for personal use, Deborah Williams chimed in. She ran a real estate agency and had that same fake smile as Patricia. You've been stockpiling commercial quantities of sand and salt. The HOA has a right to require you to use those materials for community benefit during emergencies. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. You're insane. You rejected my application to run a snow removal business. You told me I couldn't operate commercially in this community. And now you want me to do exactly that, for free, using supplies that cost me thousands of dollars. This is different, Patricia said coldly. This is an emergency. And according to our bylaws, during declared emergencies, the HOA can require residents to contribute resources for community welfare. Show me where it says that. She pulled out a copy of the bylaws and flipped to a page. Section 37, Emergency Provisions. During any declared community emergency, the HOA board may require residents to make available any equipment, materials, or services necessary for community safety and welfare. I read the section. She was technically right, but the language was vague and clearly intended for situations like letting emergency vehicles use your driveway, not confiscating thousands of dollars worth of supplies. This is garbage, I said. You can't just take my stuff. We're not taking it, Robert said. We're requiring you to use it for community benefit. There's a difference. And what if I refuse? Then you'll be in violation of the HOA bylaws and will begin fines, $100 per day until compliance. I stood up. You people are unbelievable. You spent a year making my life difficult because I was helping neighbors. Now you want to force me to help everyone for free using my own supplies that I paid for. You know what? No, absolutely not. Patricia stood as well. Then you leave us no choice. As of this moment, you're in violation. The fines begin today, and if you don't comply within 48 hours, we'll pursue legal action. Good luck with that, I said and walked out. I drove home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I wasn't shaking from fear. I was shaking from pure anger. The audacity of these people was stunning. They wanted to force me to spend my money, my time, my equipment, all to fix a problem that wasn't my responsibility, and they thought they could bully me into doing it. When I got home, I backed my truck into the garage and started moving things around. I had 8 heavy-duty storage bins full of sand, probably about 2 tons total. I had another 6 bags of rock salt, each 50 pounds. I had containers of calcium chloride ice melt, spare shovels, everything organized and ready, and I locked it all up. I took heavy-duty padlocks and secured every storage bin. I locked my garage. I put my truck inside and locked that too. Then I went inside my house, made myself some coffee and watched the neighborhood try to deal with the ice. It was brutal. The temperature stayed right at the freezing point, so the ice didn't melt. More freezing rain fell Wednesday night. By Thursday morning, Brookshire Meadows was completely paralyzed. People couldn't get to work. Kids couldn't get to school, not that the schools were open anyway. The main roads through the community, Oak Grove Boulevard and Hillside Parkway, were skating rinks. I watched from my window as cars tried to navigate, saw at least 5 slide off into drainage ditches. Nobody got hurt, thankfully, but the frustration was mounting. The township still hadn't made it to our area. They were dealing with major highways and emergency routes first, which made sense, but it left planned communities like ours on our own. Thursday afternoon, Patricia showed up at my door again. She looked rough. Her hair wasn't perfectly styled, she was wearing jeans and a parka instead of her usual business attire, and her expression was strained. Vincent, please, people are getting desperate. We need your help. You need my free labor and supplies, you mean? Fine. Yes, will you name a price? What would it cost to treat the main roads? I'd actually done the math the night before, just for fun. Materials alone, probably $3,000. My time and equipment, another $2,000. So $5,000 minimum. She paled. The HOA doesn't have that kind of discretionary budget. Not my problem. Vincent, be reasonable. People can't get out. What if there's a medical emergency? Then they'll call an ambulance, which will come from outside the community on roads that are treated. Our neighborhood being icy doesn't prevent emergency services from getting in. You're being cruel. I'm being consistent. You told me I couldn't run a business here. You threatened to fine me for helping people. You rejected every reasonable attempt I made to work with the HOA. And now you want me to give you thousands of dollars in free work because it's convenient for you. That's not going to happen. She stared at me, and I saw the exact moment she decided to go back to being nasty. Fine. The fines continue, $100 per day. We'll also be filing a formal complaint with the township about your refusal to assist during an emergency. You do that. She left, and I went back inside. I wasn't proud of letting people struggle, but I also wasn't going to be bullied into giving away thousands of dollars because Patricia Thompson thought she could push me around. There had to be another way for the community to handle this, and it wasn't my job to be their free solution. Friday morning, the sun finally came out. The temperature climbed to 35 degrees, just enough that some of the ice started to melt on surfaces that got direct sunlight. It wasn't much, but it was something. People started moving around a little more, being very careful. Around 10, I had another visitor. This time it was Robert Fitzgerald, the lawyer from the HOA board. Vincent, I'm here in an official capacity, he said when I opened the door. I'm delivering formal notice that the HOA is filing suit against you for violation of community bylaws, specifically your refusal to provide aid during a declared emergency. He handed me an envelope. I opened it and found a legal notice informing me that the Brookshire Meadows HOA was taking me to small claims court, seeking enforcement of the bylaws and $5,000 in damages for community impact. You're suing me for not giving you free stuff, I said slowly. We're suing you for violating the HOA agreement you signed when you purchased your property. This will be heard in front of a judge, and I'm confident we'll win. Robert, I'm going to give you some free legal advice, even though you didn't ask for it. That bylaw provision you're citing is extremely vague and has probably never been tested in court. Emergency provisions in HOA bylaws are meant for things like letting firefighters access your property, not forcing residents to provide materials and labor. You're going to lose, and you're going to waste HOA money on legal fees in the process. His jaw tightened. We'll see. You have 30 days to respond to the complaint. He left, and I immediately called a lawyer I knew from college, Martin Hughes, who practiced in Boston. I explained the situation, sent him pictures of the relevant bylaws, and asked his opinion. He called me back 2 hours later, laughing. Vincent, this is ridiculous. They have no case. That emergency provision is standard boilerplate language that's never meant to be enforced this way. Any judge will throw this out, but you should file a response anyway, and honestly, you might want to consider a countersuit for harassment. Can I win a countersuit? Maybe. Depends on the judge and how you present it. But the HOA has been fining you for not running a business, then demanding you run a business for free, then suing you when you won't. That's pretty clearly harassment, especially if you can show they targeted you specifically. I thought about it over the weekend. The ice was slowly melting, helped by temperatures finally climbing into the 40s. By Sunday, most of it was gone, though there were still patches in shaded areas. The township finally sent trucks through on Monday, salting the roads even though the worst was over. The community was pretty angry with me. I started getting nasty notes in my mailbox, people calling me selfish, saying I let everyone suffer when I could have helped. A few neighbors who I'd helped in the past stopped talking to me. It stung, but I also knew most of them didn't understand what the HOA had been putting me through for the past year. I spent the next few weeks preparing my legal response. Martin helped me draft something solid, and we filed it with the court. I also started documenting everything. Every interaction with Patricia, every fine notice, every threat. I gathered letters from neighbors I'd helped in the past, showing that I'd been actively trying to assist people until the HOA shut me down. The court date was set for March 20th, almost 2 months after the ice storm. In the meantime, the HOA continued fining me, $100 per day every day from the date of their emergency declaration. By the time we got to court, they were claiming I owed them over $6,000 in fines. The hearing was in Worcester District Court, Small Claims Division. Judge Sarah Martinez presided, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had a reputation for being fair but tough. Patricia showed up with Robert Fitzgerald acting as her attorney. I brought Martin, who agreed to represent me. The courtroom was small, just a simple hearing room with a judge's bench and tables for both parties. Judge Martinez had both sides sit and ask the HOA to present their case first. Robert stood and gave his argument. He explained the ice storm, the emergency conditions, and how I had refused to help despite having the equipment and materials to do so. He cited the emergency provision in the bylaws and argued that I had a contractual obligation to assist. Your Honor, Mr. Palmer deliberately hoarded materials that could have been used to help the entire community. His refusal to act put people at risk and caused significant hardship. The HOA is simply asking that he fulfill his obligations under the agreement he signed and pay the fines he incurred through his violation. Judge Martinez looked unimpressed but let him finish. Then she turned to me. Mr. Palmer, your response. Martin stood. Your Honor, this case is about an HOA attempting to force a resident to provide thousands of dollars in free labor and materials under threat of legal action. The emergency provision they're citing is standard language never intended for this purpose. Mr. Palmer purchased these supplies with his own money for his own use. The HOA has no right to commandeer private property simply because it would be convenient for them. But he signed the HOA agreement, Robert interjected. An agreement that the HOA itself violated, Martin continued. For the past year, the HOA has harassed Mr. Palmer, preventing him from operating a snow removal service even as a side activity, while simultaneously claiming he has an obligation to provide those exact services for free during emergencies. They've created an impossible situation where he cannot do what they now claim he must do. Judge Martinez held up a hand. Let me ask Mr. Palmer directly. Sir, did you refuse to help anyone during the ice storm? I stood. No, Your Honor. I helped 4 neighbors with their properties on the day of the emergency. I only refused when the HOA demanded I treat all the main community roads using my personal supplies. And why did you refuse that specifically? Because it would have cost me thousands of dollars in materials and labor, Your Honor. Materials I paid for, equipment I maintain, and time I would have spent. The HOA wanted me to do this for free, after spending a year preventing me from doing this as a paid service. Did the HOA offer any compensation? only after I refused. They offered to pay after the fact, but the amount they suggested wouldn't have covered my material costs. Judge Martinez looked at Patricia. Miss Thompson, is that accurate? Patricia stood, looking uncomfortable. We offered to compensate him reasonably, Your Honor. How much? We offered $500. And Mr. Palmer estimated his costs at what? He claimed $5,000, Your Honor, which is excessive. Judge Martinez looked back at me. Mr. Palmer, break down your costs. I pulled out the documentation I'd prepared. Your Honor, I purchased 2 tons of sand at approximately $100 per ton. That's $200. 6 50-pound bags of rock salt at $30 each, another $180. Calcium chloride ice melt, another $100. That's $480 in materials just to start. To treat all the main roads in Brookshire Meadows, which total approximately 6 miles, I would have needed to use most of my supply, probably 2/3. That's about $3,000 in materials. My equipment costs, including fuel, wear and tear on my truck and plow, and my time at a reasonable hourly rate for specialized winter services, would add at least another $2,000. So $5,000 is accurate, if anything conservative, Your Honor. Judge Martinez sat back. Miss Thompson, did the HOA make any effort to secure these services from a commercial provider? Patricia hesitated. We contacted several companies, but no one could come out during the emergency. They were all busy with priority contracts. So you wanted Mr. Palmer to provide services that commercial companies charge thousands for, and you offered him $500. We're a community, Your Honor. We should help each other. Communities are built on mutual respect and fairness, Miss Thompson, not on forcing one person to bear the financial burden for everyone else's benefit. Judge Martinez shuffled through the papers in front of her. I'm looking at the HOA bylaws, and this emergency provision you're citing is incredibly vague. It says the board may require residents to make available resources, but it doesn't define what that means, whether compensation is required, or what limits exist on such requirements. It grants the board broad discretion during emergencies, Robert argued. Discretion doesn't mean unlimited power, Mr. Fitzgerald. You should know that as an attorney. Judge Martinez looked annoyed. I'm also seeing documentation here that Mr. Palmer attempted to operate a small snow removal service last year, helping elderly neighbors, and the HOA rejected his application. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Patricia said. We don't allow commercial businesses in residential areas. But you want him to perform commercial services for free. That's different. That's an emergency situation. It's contradictory, Miss Thompson. You can't have it both ways. Either he's allowed to operate a snow removal service, in which case he can charge fair rates, or he's not, in which case you can't force him to provide those services. Judge Martinez closed the folder in front of her. Here's my ruling. The HOA's interpretation of the emergency provision is overly broad and unreasonable. While HOA bylaws can include emergency provisions, they cannot be used to compel residents to provide expensive services and materials without fair compensation. Mr. Palmer was under no legal obligation to treat the community roads at his own expense. Robert started to object, but Judge Martinez cut him off. I'm not finished. The HOA's claim for fines is denied in its entirety. Mr. Palmer did not violate the bylaws because the bylaws cannot reasonably be interpreted to require what the HOA demanded. Furthermore, I'm troubled by the pattern of behavior I'm seeing here. The HOA prevented Mr. Palmer from operating a snow removal service, then tried to force him to provide those services for free. That's not reasonable governance, that's harassment. Patricia's face went red. Your Honor, we were acting in the community's best interest. You were acting in the community's convenience, not its best interest. There's a difference. Mr. Palmer is entitled to the same rights as any other property owner. He's not obligated to subsidize the entire neighborhood's emergency response. Judge Martinez looked at the papers Martin had filed. I see Mr. Palmer has filed a countersuit for harassment and requesting attorney's fees. I'm going to grant the request for attorney's fees. The HOA will reimburse Mr. Palmer for his legal costs in defending this frivolous lawsuit. She looked at Martin. You have documentation of fees? Yes, Your Honor. Martin provided his invoice, which totaled $1,200. Granted. As for the harassment claim, that will require a separate hearing with more evidence, but I'm advising the HOA board to reconsider their approach to governance. This kind of overreach is exactly what gives homeowners associations a bad reputation. The hearing ended and we walked out into the hallway. Patricia was furious, Robert looked embarrassed, and I felt vindicated. Martin shook my hand. That went well, he said. Judge Martinez didn't pull any punches. Think we should pursue the harassment claim? Up to you. You've made your point. Sometimes it's better to take the win and move on. I thought about it as I drove home. Part of me wanted to keep fighting, to make sure Patricia and her board couldn't pull this kind of thing on anyone else. But another part was just tired of the whole thing. The legal victory was enough. The judge had publicly called them out for harassment and overreach. Maybe that would be enough to change things. It wasn't. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I got a notice from the HOA about a special assessment being levied on all residents to cover the legal fees the association now owed me. Every homeowner in Brookshire Meadows was being charged an extra $50 to pay for the lawsuit Patricia had decided to pursue against me. The notice included a passive-aggressive paragraph about how one resident's refusal to contribute during an emergency had resulted in this financial burden for everyone. It didn't mention that the HOA had started the lawsuit. It didn't mention that a judge had called their actions unreasonable. It just made me look like the bad guy who cost everyone money. I was livid. This was exactly the kind of manipulation I'd come to expect from Patricia, but seeing it in writing, knowing that every neighbor would now blame me for this fee, was infuriating. I decided to fight back, but not through more lawsuits. I went door to door. Over the next week, I visited every house on my street and the adjacent streets, probably 40 homes total. I brought copies of the court documents, the judge's ruling, everything. I explained what had actually happened. How the HOA had harassed me for a year, tried to force me to provide thousands of dollars in free services, sued me when I refused and lost badly in court. Most people were shocked. They'd only heard Patricia's version of events, filtered through official HOA communications that made it sound like I'd refused to help anyone during the ice storm. When they saw the documentation, when they understood that I'd actually helped neighbors and only refused the HOA's unreasonable demands, their attitudes changed. Mrs. Chen, whose driveway I'd cleared during the storm, was particularly angry. "That woman told us you wouldn't help anyone," she said, shaking her head. "She made it sound like you just sat in your house while people suffered." "That's not what happened," I said. "I helped 4 neighbors that day, including you. I just wouldn't donate thousands of dollars in supplies to treat every road in the neighborhood." "Of course not. Why would you? That's not your job." By the end of the week, I'd talked to at least 60 residents. Word spread quickly after that. People started questioning the HOA board, asking why they'd pursued such an expensive and pointless lawsuit. A group of residents demanded a special meeting to discuss the board's actions. The meeting was scheduled for April 15th, held in the Brookshire Meadows Community Center. I wasn't planning to attend, figuring my presence would just make things more heated, but Mr. Henderson convinced me otherwise. "You need to be there," he said. "People need to hear from you directly. Patricia will try to spin this if you're not there to set the record straight." So I went. The community center was packed, probably 200 residents crammed into a space meant for half that. Patricia and the board sat at a table in front, looking defensive. When I walked in, conversation stopped. People stared. Then Mrs. Chen started clapping. Others joined in. Not everyone, maybe half the room, but it was enough. I felt my face flush as I found a seat near the back. Patricia called the meeting to order, her expression tight. "We're here to discuss concerns that have been raised about the board's handling of the winter emergency situation. I want to start by saying that everything we did was in accordance with our duties as board members and our commitment to this community." "You lost a lawsuit," someone called out. I recognized him as David Park, a guy who lived 3 streets over. "You cost us all $50 because you decided to sue someone for not giving you free stuff." "That's an oversimplification," Robert Fitzgerald said. "We were attempting to enforce legitimate HOA bylaws during an emergency." "The judge said you were harassing him," Mrs. Chen said, standing up. I read the ruling. Judge Martinez said the HOA's actions were unreasonable and contradictory. "You prevented Vincent from running a snow removal business, then tried to force him to do snow removal for free. How is that reasonable?" Patricia's face was red. "We were dealing with an unprecedented situation. We made the best decisions we could with the information we had." "You made bad decisions," another voice called. "And now we're all paying for it." The meeting devolved into arguments. People were angry, divided between those who blamed me for not helping and those who blamed Patricia for starting a fight she couldn't win. It went on for over an hour, getting more heated. Finally, someone made a motion to hold a vote of no confidence in the current board. The motion was seconded, and Patricia tried to shut it down, claiming it wasn't on the agenda and couldn't be voted on without proper notice. "According to our bylaws," David Park said, standing with a copy of the community rules, "any special meeting can address any topic if a majority of residents present agree to hear it. I move we vote on whether to hear the no confidence motion." That vote passed, 73 to 42. Then the actual no confidence vote happened. It was closer, but it still passed, 112 to 68. The entire board was out. Patricia looked like she'd been slapped. She gathered her papers, said something about this being a mistake the community would regret, and walked out. The other board members followed, except for Stephen Clark, who'd barely said anything during the whole mess. "I think we made mistakes," he said quietly before leaving. "I'm sorry it went this far." A temporary board was formed that night with David Park, Mrs. Chen, and 3 others volunteering to serve until proper elections could be held. One of their first acts was to rescind the special assessment, instead paying my legal fees from the HOA's reserve fund, where the money should have come from in the first place. The second thing they did was ask me if I'd be interested in submitting a new application to operate a small snow removal business within the community. I thought about it for a few days. Part of me wanted nothing to do with the HOA or any formal arrangement. The whole experience had left a bad taste in my mouth. But another part recognized that this was an opportunity to actually help people the way I'd originally wanted to. I submitted an application. The new board approved it unanimously. They set reasonable restrictions. No commercial vehicles parked on the street overnight, no storing equipment outdoors, and I had to maintain appropriate insurance. All things I was already doing or happy to do. That next winter, When the first big storm hit in December, I was ready. I had my supplies restocked, my equipment maintained, and a list of clients who'd signed up for service. I plowed driveways, treated walkways, and helped keep Brookshire Meadows safe. And this time I got paid for it. Patricia never apologized, but I never expected her to. She moved out of Brookshire Meadows that summer, selling her house and relocating somewhere in New Hampshire. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that she'd gotten involved with another HOA up there. I felt sorry for those residents. The experience taught me a lot about standing up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable. About not letting people take advantage just because they have a title or authority. And about the importance of community actually meaning mutual support, not one-sided demands. I still live in Brookshire Meadows. My snow removal business has grown into a nice side income. I've got regular clients, good relationships with my neighbors, and a functional relationship with the HOA that's based on mutual respect instead of one party trying to bully the other. And my storage bins. They're still full of sand and salt, ready for whenever New England decides to throw another ice storm our way. But this time, they're locked with good padlocks and I'm the only one with the keys. Some lessons, once learned, aren't forgotten. The new board turned out to be surprisingly effective. They streamlined a lot of the unnecessarily complicated rules Patricia had implemented, focused on actual community improvements instead of petty enforcement, and generally made Brookshire Meadows a better place to live. They even organized a community emergency preparedness committee with volunteers who actually wanted to help coordinate responses to future weather events or other problems. I didn't join the committee, though they asked. I'd had enough of formal HOA involvement. But I did agree to be on a list of residents with useful equipment and skills, people the community could reach out to if needed. The difference was that it was voluntary, and any use of equipment or supplies would be compensated fairly. Revolutionary concept, I know. One interesting development came about 6 months after the ice storm incident. The township, hearing about the problems Brookshire Meadows and other planned communities had faced, changed their emergency response protocols. They set up a system where HOAs could purchase priority service contracts for winter weather events, essentially paying in advance to move their neighborhoods up the treatment list during storms. The new board approached me about whether it would be more cost-effective to purchase one of those contracts or to contract with local residents like me who had equipment. I helped them analyze the costs. We determined that for routine storms, having a few residents with equipment was cheaper and more responsive. But for major events, having the township contract as backup made sense. They ended up doing both, which struck me as intelligent planning. They contracted with me and 2 other residents who had plowing equipment for regular service, paying us retainer fees for the season plus per storm rates, and they bought a township contract for major emergencies. Everyone won. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I kept working my engineering job, did snow removal in winter, and enjoyed my house and neighborhood. The drama faded into the past, becoming one of those stories people told newcomers. Oh yeah, we had this crazy HOA president once who tried to force someone to give away thousands of dollars in supplies. It didn't end well for her. But there was one final chapter to the whole mess, and it came almost a year after the court hearing. I got a call in February, 13 months after the original ice storm. It was from Martin Hughes, my lawyer. "Vincent, interesting development in your HOA situation," he said. "I just got contacted by an attorney representing a neighborhood in New Hampshire. Apparently, they're dealing with a very similar issue with their HOA president, and they wanted information about your case as precedent." "Let me guess," I said. The president's name is Patricia Thompson. How'd you know? I laughed. She moved up there after everything went down here. What's she doing now? Pretty much the same thing from what I understand. There was a winter storm. She tried to force a resident to use his personal generator to power the community center, threatened fines when he refused, and now they are in court. Their attorney found the ruling from your case and wants to use it in their defense. She never learns, does she? Some people don't. Anyway, I gave them permission to cite the case and sent over the relevant documents. I thought you'd want to know. Thanks for the heads up. After hanging up, I felt a strange mix of amusement and satisfaction. Patricia had learned nothing from the Brookshire Meadows experience. She'd moved to a new community and immediately started the same controlling, overreaching behavior. And now, she was going to lose another court case, further establishing legal precedent that HOA boards couldn't just commandeer residents' property and labor during emergencies. I never heard the final outcome of that New Hampshire case, but I'd bet money Patricia lost. Judges tend not to like HOA overreach, especially when there's already precedent against it. As for me, I'm doing fine. My house is paid off, my business is steady, and I've got good relationships with my neighbors and the HOA. I learned that sometimes you have to stand up to unreasonable people, even when it costs you time, money, and temporary popularity. Because giving in to bullies just encourages more bullying. Every winter, when the first snow falls, I look at my locked storage bins full of supplies and smile. They represent more than just sand and salt. They represent the principle that people can't be forced to subsidize others' convenience just because someone with a title demands it. They represent boundaries, self-respect, and the willingness to fight for what's right even when it's difficult. And every winter, when I plow my neighbors' driveways and get paid fairly for it, I'm reminded that communities work best when they're built on mutual respect and fair exchange, not on one-sided demands and threats. The ice storm that started this whole mess was one of the worst weather events Massachusetts had seen in years. But for me, it ended up being one of the best things that could have happened. It forced me to stand up for myself. It exposed an abusive HOA board, and it ultimately led to positive changes that made Brookshire Meadows a better community. Sometimes conflict is necessary. Sometimes you have to lock your bins and let the roads ice over, metaphorically speaking, to make people understand that you're not a resource to be exploited. It's not comfortable, and it's not fun, but it's necessary. I still get the occasional sideways look from residents who remember the controversy, and still think, I should have just given the HOA what they wanted. But most people understand now. Most people recognize that what Patricia demanded was unreasonable, and that my refusal was justified. And the ones who don't understand, well, they're welcome to their opinions. I'm not living my life trying to please everyone. I'm living it according to my principles, and those principles say that respect is a two-way street. The HOA wants cooperation. They need to offer it first. They want community support during emergencies. They need to treat residents fairly during normal times. It's not complicated, but for people like Patricia Thompson, it seems impossible to grasp. They see authority as a one-way street where they make demands and others comply. They never learned that real authority, the kind people respect and follow willingly, is earned through fairness and mutual consideration. The Brookshire Meadows community learned that lesson the hard way. They elected a board that promised to maintain property values and enforce standards, and they got a dictatorial regime that prioritized control over common sense. It took a crisis, a lawsuit, and significant community conflict to fix the problem, but fix it they did. The new board, and the one that was properly elected 6 months later were night and day different from Patricia's regime. They focused on actual community needs, they communicated openly, and they treated residents as partners rather than subjects. Property values stayed strong, the neighborhood remained attractive, and people were actually happy to live there again. I occasionally wonder what Patricia tells people about her time in Brookshire Meadows. Does she frame herself as a victim of an ungrateful community? Does she blame me for her downfall? Or does she ever engage in self-reflection and wonder if maybe, just maybe, she could have handled things differently? Probably not that last one. People like Patricia rarely engage in real self-reflection. They're too invested in being right to consider that they might be wrong. But that's not my problem anymore. My problem is making sure I've got enough sand and salt for this winter's storms, that my plow blade is in good shape, and that my client list is up to date. Those are manageable problems, concrete problems with clear solutions. Unlike dealing with an out-of-control HOA president, which is a problem with no good solution except standing firm and refusing to be pushed around. I did that, and I'm proud of it. Would I do anything differently if I could go back? Maybe I would have documented things better from the beginning, kept more detailed records of every interaction with Patricia and the board. That would have made the legal case even stronger, but otherwise, no, I'd make the same choices. I'd refuse the unreasonable demands, I'd fight the lawsuit, and I'd work to change the board. Because those were the right things to do, even though they were difficult. The whole experience made me a stronger person. It taught me that I could stand up to institutional pressure, that I could fight legal battles and win, that I could survive being temporarily unpopular in my own neighborhood. Those are valuable lessons, even if I wish I'd learned them under different circumstances. It also gave me a healthy skepticism about HOAs in general. I understand their purpose, and I even appreciate some of what they do in terms of maintaining common areas and enforcing reasonable standards. But I also understand how quickly they can become tools of petty tyranny if the wrong people get control. If I ever move, I'll be very careful about any HOA situation. I'll read the bylaws carefully, attend meetings before buying, and get a sense of how the board operates. Because once you're in, you're subject to their rules, and changing bad rules or bad boards is difficult and time-consuming. For now, though, I'm staying put. Brookshire Meadows is my home, and despite the drama, I like it here. I've got good neighbors, a nice house, and a community that learned from its mistakes. That's more than a lot of people can say. And when winter storms roll in, when the ice starts forming and people start worrying about their driveways and walkways, I'm ready to help. For fair compensation, with mutual respect, and with full control over my own property and labor. The way it should be.